Hello, everyone. This is Matthew Remski, host of Anti-Fascist Dad podcast with episode number 41, The Anti-Vance Would Like a Word with Nathan Evans Fox. You can find me on Blue Sky and Instagram under my name. I'm on YouTube and TikTok as Anti-Fascist Dad, and the Patreon for this show is at Anti-Fascist Dad Podcast, where subscribers get early access to a second weekly episode. And today it's the second part of my interview with Nathan, because we went a little bit long in our discussion of J.D. Vance's blogboy Catholicism, now memorialized in his memoir Communion, and how he both distorts and weaponizes Appalachian history and American Christianity. Remember, if you can't afford to support the show, those Patreon episodes all eventually get unlocked. And also, as always, I would ask you to take a look at the link for my book called Anti-Fascist Dad, Urgent Conversations with Young People in Chaotic Times. That link is in the show notes, along with everything else you need to more fully dive into the stuff that we get into in this episode. Before I get to my interview with return guest and friend Nathan Evans Fox and his rich analysis of J.D. Vance, I do have one news update and reflection for you, which is that this past Thursday, Marco Rubio convened a ministerial on the resurgence of political terrorism at the State Department based on the false premise that political violence is rising on the left. In attendance were representatives from around 65 countries, including Peacemaking Canada, where I live. Kash Patel was there. Stephen Miller was there. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar was there to cheerlead. Now, there are many, many studies that expose the lie at the heart of this conference, not that they care. New America's Terrorism in America After 9/11 is an ongoing tracker of post-9/11 domestic terrorism deaths, and it found that far-left violence killed one person since 2001 versus 137 victims of far-right terrorism and 121 victims of jihadist extremism. Here in Canada, the CSIS report, called Left-Wing Terrorism and Political Violence in the United States, analyzed 750 attacks or plots between 1994 and 2025. Right-wing incidents made up 57% of the incidents versus 25% being of the left wing. And they found 112 right-wing linked deaths over the past decade versus 13 deaths linked to leftist political violence. That's a factor of 9-1. Now, even the ultra-Zionist ADL isn't that afraid of the left with their murder and extremism in the United States study, which tracks extremist-related murders since 1970. Over the last decade, the ADL found that right-wing extremism was the cause of 75% of such killings versus 4% attributed to left-wing actors. And between 2022 and 2024, there were 0 left-wing attributed murders, with all extremist killings traced to right-wing perpetrators. Now, of course, there are right-wing critics of these studies who say that they undercount left-wing violence, and predictably, their complaint is based on the equivalence of private property with human life. They say that the studies focus too narrowly on deaths and injuries while excluding property destruction and economic sabotage, arson, vandalism, riot-related burning and looting, attacks on Tesla dealerships, ICE facilities, and businesses during unrest during 2020. Now, all of the property damage, they say, is disproportionately left-coded and deliberately excluded from data sets like Cato's murder-only count and CSIS's protest excluding method. They contend that this creates an apples to oranges comparison, that right-wing violence trends toward direct lethality, while left-wing violence trends towards property-targeted economic sabotage. So death count comparisons systematically favor whichever side's violence happens to be less lethal, but potentially more frequent or costly in property terms. I don't think that's a great argument, by the way. I don't think it's saying what they want it to say. So yes, they are whining that there's too much attention paid to death. And I'd argue that the studies, however, don't pay enough attention to death. Namely, they exclude state violence So when the time comes, these models won't even look at murders by ICE, which are incidents of right-wing political murder. What Rubio and Miller are up to is a common fascist tactic for consolidating power. In February of 1933, the Nazis blamed a lone wolf Dutch ex-communist for the Reichstag arson, and then they suspended civil liberties and they mass arrested Communist Party members. This led to the Enabling Act in March, which granted Hitler dictatorial power over parliament, and Mussolini pretty much got up to the same crap. Now, this has echoed through the generations. The Greek colonel's coup in 1967 over an imminent communist conspiracy suspended the constitution, jailed, exiled, or tortured thousands of leftists and trade unionists. Pinochet's junta in 1973 falsely claimed that Allende harbored a Marxist plot to assassinate military leaders. And it goes on from there. So that's the political landscape. But this podcast, as you know, is also about what happens at home and between the generations, between parents and caregivers and young people, and how the general zeitgeist of rising fascism impacts these lives. So I want to say a word on that, because fascism is not just about suppressing political opposition to capitalism. It's also about disciplining children who would otherwise know that the world they are growing into is unjust. The cohort of men leading this charge, I'm going to argue, loathe your children because they cannot control their thoughts, their difference, their appearance. And to make that clear, let's listen to Stephen Miller addressing this international gathering of diplomats.
The leftist looks at what is beautiful and what is good and what is natural and is filled with envy and hatred. The leftist looks at a perfect family with the perfect life and a perfect job and perfect kids that goes to church every Sunday and is filled with a feeling of inadequacy and jealousy, and they covet, and they turn those emotions ultimately into a desire to subjugate, to oppress, and to inflict pain and suffering.
So I'll just pause here to say that for all of the talk about family and children, these are men who do not want children. They want dolls modeled after themselves, reflecting back to them their own compliance, validating their anxieties, and never having thoughts that test the boundaries of authority or identity.
It's not a coincidence that when you look at these violent Antifa demonstrations, you see any photograph of those who were assembled. To be blunt, not one of the people that is demonstrating looks like a normal person. Not one looks normal. They're all deformed in some way in their appearance, in their dress, in their mannerism. Why is that? Why? If you look at two photographs and you see a normal American street, you see an Antifa protest. Why do the people that are violently demonstrating, why is there not one normal-looking person among them? Every one of them, through the course of their life and their decisions, has scarred their body and their appearance in many different ways, to the point in which their outer appearance becomes a manifestation of their inner hatred.
Now, all of this talk about appearances is actually about thought crime, because the Thursday conference was basically the operational output of a memo put out by the Trump administration back in September called Countering Domestic Terrorism and Organized Political Violence. In that memo, NSPM 7, the administration listed a series of undefined and unfalsifiable thought crimes associated with anti-fascism, anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, anti-Christianity, support for the overthrow of the United States government, extremism on migration, race, and gender, hostility toward those who hold traditional American views on family, religion, and morality. Now, let's be clear that he's talking here about young people primarily, if he's talking about the protests of the last 2 years, or those that they're really cracking down on. And he's doing a kind of Nazi physiognomy on appearances. Like if they could have included piercings and hair dye and non-binary clothing in NSPM 7, they would have, as signs of ideological impurity and thought crime. Also, to use the word disfigured here, also, like it points to the eugenics themes that run throughout this regime. So I think that as we careen into a fully post-democratic world in which all protest, especially the protest against a genocide that murders children, is criminalized, the question for parents and caregivers becomes, how will children who are not dolls learn about having their own thoughts, let alone about the history of anti-fascism? How will they learn about standing up for themselves and each other? As the arrests increase and the trials continue to return decades-long sentences for possession of things like magazines, the visible and audible world of grown-up anti-fascism online and in the street will probably go more quiet. And that means that your kids will be seeing and learning a lot less about resistance from the world outside your home. I think the opportunity in this malicious condition is to deepen all of the relationships that Stephen Miller would love to control and can't really even fathom. If your online or street activism becomes a vulnerability, that might mean that an offline doorway has been opened. The mealtime conversation, the book discussion, the daily news review, anything that keeps the flame you know you have alive and hidden from the state. Fascists exist in a spiral of aggressive panic because ultimately they know they can't kill everyone nor change who we truly are.
Well, I hope your tenants make meth and chain smoke. Got a herd of cats ain't ever get trained. I hope all your children grow up to call you by your first name. Well, it'd be mighty nice to see you get right, but you chose a road you'd hoe. So I hope trouble come and find you till you lose your mind. You get lost or finally come home. I'm wishing you a hard life, hard times, but you get.
So speaking of who we truly are, I'm really happy to invite back to the show Nathan Evans Fox, country musician, seminary graduate, board certified hospital chaplain, and actual Appalachian, to get his read on J.D. Vance's new memoir called Communion. We just heard a song called Landlord, Bill Lee, etc., and it's off of his brand new record called Heirloom. And I think if we think of Stephen Miller's and the J.D. Vances of the world as, landlords, the I'm wishing you a hard life chorus fits. I read J.D. Vance's memoir last month, and my take was that it is a calculated rebranding operation, a kind of second memoir attempt that plays the same narcissistic trick as Hillbilly Elegy by, converting just one guy's contingent, patronage-based trajectory into a diagnosis for the entire culture that wasn't so lucky. Hillbilly Elegy launders structural poverty as a kind of cultural pathology. And now we have Communion, which launders his political repositioning within American Christianities as a kind of spiritual conversion. And in that wash, a lot of color gets erased. The history of Appalachian labor militancy in the Elegy, and then the racist origins of the Christian right in Communion. Vance also winds through all of the newly fractured MAGA Christian constituencies with this kind of pastoral, therapeutic register that's vague enough to appeal to everyone while committing to no one. And he finally settles on Catholicism, which functions as a kind of respectable cover for fascism. But that's all theory on my part. So I texted Nathan and I said, I think you know this terrain in the flesh, and I think you should review this book. I think you're the Anti-Vance. And he reluctantly agreed, and he wrote it all out in a Substack post that I'll link to. But just to give a sense of his depth and wit, here are some of my favorite quotes. Quote, contesting JD's theology, the ideas that articulate his Christian belonging, is like arguing about the garish paint color in a shoddily built house in a poorly planned neighborhood in a devastated ecosystem. Quote, where JD presents his faith journey as a testimony, I see the insatiable hunger of a man possessed by the logic of accumulation. When accumulating prestige could not sate him, JD turned to money. And when wealth could not satisfy either, he turned to virtue. Each step offered something more abstract, more nuanced, and less obvious in its emptiness. Quote, the real revelation of communion is not the supremacy of Catholic virtue, but how deeply the parasite of American power has eaten into this man's vital spiritual organs. Communion is not a salvation story. It's a case study in addiction and neurosis. The story of JD's coming to faith is the morality tale of a man born in an ivy patch who places faith in the soothing power of the fingernail that scratches the itch but spreads the poison. And finally, quote, after years as a hospital chaplain, helping people sort through the functions and dysfunctions of their cultural scripts, I've learned that all religions help you cope with something. The question is not if your religion is helping you cope, but what it is helping you cope with. And the coping and communion's theology is the palliation of a man who believes power and privilege should be comforting, but only finds it riddled with imperial anxiety. So here's the first half of my conversation with Nathan Evans-Fox. Nathan, welcome back to Anti-Fascist Dad.
It's good to be back. I'm always glad to talk with you.
Just to catch up a little bit, I think that Noah was on the way when we first spoke. And so, like, how old is he now?
He is 6 months, almost 7 months.
Oh
I now
gosh.
have a 3-year-old as well.
Yeah.
Like, a lot has... Let me tell you, the shift from 2 to 3 is big.
Yeah, right.
The shift from 0 to 6 months is big.
Yeah, well, I hope you're getting some sleep. I know you're doing, lots of work and gigs and stuff like that. I know too that like I think your partner was away for a bit and the toddler had to readjust and, try you on as the primary person for a bit. And that was a shift. It's very busy.
Well, it's always shifting. We've had so much like change in our family life, in our work life, all of that. And touring's going better than ever for me, like with music this year, which is great. But it also means that like I am really available or really not. And so it's a lot to try to get. It's a lot to try to like find a system that works for the family, because the moment that you get a routine, like I'm gone or my wife's gone for her work. Yeah. Or, you're explaining to a toddler, like, just press pause on your feelings for a little bit. I know this is your first time ever having them. So it's a lot. Yeah. It's a lot to figure out.
And then we have J.D. Vance publishing a memoir, and then you have to tackle that because I send you a text and I say, hey, you have to do this. And so that messes everything up.
Yeah. I am not mad at you.
Okay, good.
I'm not mad at you, but it sucked. I'm not going like I had therapy the week that I was reading this book, and I was like, hey, look, I need you to know, like, I'm in a foul mood, and it's because I feel like I've had a demon trying to crawl into my body, and I'm pretty good at reading things that like are full of horrors, and like I'm not new to this world. Like and I know kind of like how to get through things that, how to process things in a way that is like empathic and connected and also can keep it moving. Yeah. But this one just like, it flew all over me. And part of that is like, I have so much, he's just like, he just is like the multiverse. He's one click over from me. And so there's this like real, it was all over me. It was like trying to get pulled into a different timeline.
Let's go right to that, because I'm aiming to title this episode "The Anti-Vance Would Like a Word." Yeah. When I texted you, I said, I don't know anyone more qualified to understand the depravity of this memoir from the inside than you are. So let's just unpack that a bit. I think I was right.
Yeah. Yeah. Should I just give my resume on why?
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
People know that it's for real. Well, first of all, and most importantly, I'm actually from Appalachia. Unlike JD, who wants to claim a little bit of Appalachian heritage. Where we do have some overlap, though, even on that, is like I now live in Nashville, which is not Appalachia. My hometown was wrecked. It's like very cute to go back now. But my hometown was run through by the recession. We lost so many jobs. And the ways that the state government in North Carolina was going and all that, there weren't many places for people to turn. So I had to leave home. There was no chance of me going home. When my mom all died, I grew up on family land. My family had to sell that land because the access to medical care where we were was frankly not great. And there was no way for me to come back and take over the family land. So we share that sense of like being outcast, which I think actually is an unusually big part of where JD's story is. But there's that. I'm a country musician, so like I understand the creative task of like telling a story.
Yeah.
I understand the task of even having a kind of like, somebody use this word with me, I don't prefer it, but having a kind of leadership. Like I understand what it means to get people together and use your story to try to like sell people a compelling political vision.
Right.
I don't like to talk about this because it gets really squirrely really quick and people get a lot of misconceptions about it. And it was also a different phase of my life. But I have a master's of divinity. Like I've been to seminary for the full 3 years. I was trained as a hospital chaplain. I was a board certified hospital chaplain, which takes years and years of extra training and extra work. I've worked with folks from all kinds of religious and non-religious backgrounds on the ways that like their cultural scripts, their norms, their religious languages, whatever matters to them, impacts their coping with loss and trauma and illness. So in all of this, like I really culturally, and there's other like, there's other just like random connections I have to him that just kept popping up throughout the book.
Right.
So yeah, like I'm truly, you calling me the Anti-Vance hurts a little bit, but it's true.
One of the things that you hint at, especially while you like accuse him of this self-serving duplicity in cosplaying Appalachian identity, is that like you're personally aware of how that can go, like how people do that and how they wind up doing that. So, you're at a show and you have this line where you say, JD Vance could have turned out to be me. And is part of what you're getting at that, you could have turned out to be him with a different turn of the screw.
Yes. I want to be very clear. I could have never turned out to be that demon.
All right.
And I also want to say like part of the level of bullshit that I just refuse to buy about him is the ways that he just acts like he's an everyman. Bub, like, no.
Yeah.
like he's not. He's not actually from Appalachia, which that extra generation or two away from being from like Appalachia, which we could get into like what all that could even mean and the ways that Appalachia is so complicated in the ways that it sits in like the North American and American imagination, the ways that it's used to like be the Eden of like white suffering, and then we don't have to think about black and indigenous folks. Like there's so much about the way that Appalachia gets bandied about. Setting all that aside, even that generation difference of like being removed from that's a significant shift in power and access to capital and all of that. So even the way that he narrates himself in that line is there's a kind of glibness to that and a disingenuousness to that means like he's either selling you bullshit or he's not taking stock of what he's actually got available to him. So there's that. But at my shows, I say he should have been me. It's not just that he could have been me. I say he should have been me. Like there's something that I find like frankly very like I have a lot of disgust for JD Vance.
Yeah.
That is the word on the feelings wheel. I feel a lot of disgust for him. Because part of being where we're from is that all of us knew better than that. Like he could like that's not to say that we're all commies like I am, like just by a long shot, but like at best you become a cop, dude. Like at best you become a bootlicker. At best you maybe run for state senate, and like I for sure have a lot of enmity with you, but you don't go and cozy up to Peter Thiel, and you certainly don't go be vice president sopping up all of the horrors of the Trump administration. And I mean even more than that, it's like, dude, I don't think you have a sense of pride, and pride is one of the things that has been instilled in us, which is that like you're just gonna go and just let somebody trot you out. Like you're just gonna go like, be a dog and pony show for people who don't care about where you say you're from. It is like he should have been me, or even 5 clicks away from me, but he's about 1,000 away.
It's so interesting that you invoke pride, that somehow if he were to have it, that he would. I mean, what's the step between, at best you become, or at worst you become a cop, or you go to the state Senate. What's the step between that and Peter Thiel? Is it that the guy who becomes a cop, at least he's staying at home? At least he's maintaining some sort of connection with his people, even if it's adversarial, even if it's authoritarian, even if he's licking the boot?
Yeah, I think so. Like, at least he knows, at least in one way or another, he's not too big for his britches. Like, that's the colloquialism that like gets passed around a lot, but I think it holds a lot of water. Like, I think of J.D. Vance as like I think of him as someone who has actively betrayed the culture that he says that he's from.
Yeah.
Whereas like a cop is someone who is a possible permutation, is certainly not helpful to the future of it. But yeah, they are in the community. Like, you can get there, you can be a good egg and turn out every rotten egg starts good somewhere, so you can be a good egg at the beginning, and end up just being like swept up into a system through a series of like, through propaganda and through like being initiated into the fraternity of, like all the locker room culture of the cops. And you can end up just being a person who perpetuates awful things in society, but you do it because you started at the root being a member of your community,
right?
Or just needing a job that like takes a couple weeks of training or whatever, Like, I know people that have become cops from back home, and I definitely I don't agree with the choice at all, but like, I don't think they're horrible people.
Right.
At least they weren't at the beginning. I don't know. I don't keep up with them anymore. They could have become fully horrible people. But yeah, I think there's a real, like, I don't know. I don't want to like fully psychologize JD, frankly, because I don't think he's worth it. And I don't think that even he could give an accurate report of where he's at. But I do want to say, like, insofar as people have decided that J.D. Vance speaks for me, I want people to know that he's a traitor. Like, he is someone who isn't just wrong. He is he's evil. Like, he's an evil influence for hillbillies and for hillbilly culture. You can't sidle up to Peter Thiel and the ways that he's a part of this like big tech movement right now, and then act like you care about hillbillies when they're bowling over everybody's hollers to put data centers in.
Right.
When like whatever. We could get into all of that. But he's actively a traitor, and I think that's the thing I want people to know.
Well, I'm going to come back to the evil part in the end, because you end this incredible review with a kind of a curse, right? Or perhaps it's an exorcism. But maybe the test really is that, speaking of cops, the cop probably doesn't make everybody uncomfortable when they go to the donut shop, but J.D. Vance manages to do that, right? Like, you can still go to the donut shop and not make everybody feel like they want to crawl out of their skin because they don't know why you're there and you don't either.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, I don't normally rag on people like this because I am genuinely pretty capacious. I think my general rule is, like, you're allowed to be as annoying as you want. You're just not allowed to be harmful. And I think that's fine. Like, I don't care if you're annoying. Like, I don't prefer it, but like, you're allowed to be weird. Yeah. You're allowed to be a little bit of a loser, whatever. Just don't hurt people. Like, you'll find your people, I'll find my people, we'll go our separate ways, and no one's going to try to make anybody's life harder just because like we're not a good fit personality-wise. I think part of the reason that J.D. Vance being so off-putting is important is because of the ways that he has been wrapped up in this propaganda machine and the ways that he has tried to self-style and message himself to try to get more power. Like, he is trying to present himself as an everyman. He's trying to present himself as like he's in this cadre of people like Pete Hegseth who are doing like all of these push-ups with the troops, and they're nothing more than a glorified youth pastor doing programming for the American military. But like, these people are trying to present themselves as very cool, and they really are. And I hate it because the Democrats did. I don't love the Democrats, okay? But I'm getting really worked up here. But the Democrats did try to really message us like these are weirdos.
Yeah.
But they were right.
Yeah.
Like broken clocks. The Democrats were right to say they are weirdos. J.D. Vance is not a likable person. He's actually pretty pathetic and he's pretty pitiable, which would be fine, except he's chosen to not just be a loser. Like, he should have been an anime kid.
Yeah.
He should have been somebody who like was a realtor back home. Like, he could have been anything, and instead he decided to try to like lie about who he is, cut against the cut of his grain, and it's cost thousands of people their lives. Like, literally. Not to mention the ways that it's compromised the future.
We probably both have some kind of reticence around the ad hominem format, but I think the point that you're making is that if you are selling your persona, if you're selling yourself as a person, as a man, then that has to be evaluated. Like, that's the primary value proposition, and it's like, okay, well, what's actually there?
Yeah. JD chose to be evaluated for his vibes.
Yeah.
And they suck. Yeah.
So, I've been writing for a very long time, and when I went through this review, I just felt like it was really a work of art. I told you this by voice message. And I think it's one of those things that sort of comes around just every once in a while for a writer, because they're really matched to the task. You pack so much into it that I'm not going to be able to do it justice just in our interview, but I can share my own points of assessment and where they come together with yours first. And then I want to talk about where you take it to a totally different planet that is new to me, but it feels familiar as well. And the first point of overlap is that, I think we both see this sequel, Communion, as a sequel to Hillbilly Elegy, as a memoir that's dressed up as a national diagnosis. And you go further, though, and you see this autobiography as a form of apologetics. But, this is a theological term that I have a little bit of a grasp on, but what is it a form of apologetics for?
Yeah. I think the most important thing, I'm guessing your listeners probably know what apologetics are, but I'm going to explain it just in case.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like, apologetics are when you already have a kind of preconceived conclusion and set of principles that you are fully committed to, and the work, all of your intellectual work, is to try to justify and undergird those conclusions. So you're finding ways of using what should be kind of open thought, open consideration, open discourse to funnel people towards something that you're like a supremacist about.
Right.
So really it's a kind of like polemical work. It's there really as a rhetorical strategy. It's not there as a kind of like open-ended intellectual task where the premises end up leading to the conclusion rather than the conclusion, you put the cart before the horse and then, whatever. But so one thing is that like this is really a book about Catholicism and I also want to say this like very plainly. I had a Catholic wedding. So like this is another touch point. I had a Catholic wedding. I'm not Catholic. I married a Catholic.
Did not know that.
Yes, I married like a dyed-in-the-wool, like before, for years and years and years, we were going to every mass and every feast day. Like I've been to more masses than most. I know the Catholic world, not as well as a priest, but like pretty damn well. What J.D. Vance, when I say Catholicism and I'm talking about J.D. Vance, I'm not talking about your mom and pop parish. I'm talking about specific movements that he's a part of. And we can get into that later. But like, this is not, I don't want people to feel like this is representing all of the Catholic world. This is representing the little camp that he's in. This book is really a way of selling people on the supremacy and the superiority of his camp of Catholicism and the family of religious traditions that are around it. And they're primarily right-wing religious traditions. A lot of them are evangelical. I would be curious if there's also a link with like Hindu nationalism and other right-wing non-Christian traditions. I'd be very curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, I have looked a little bit into, the sort of public profile and statements of Usha Vance and her and her sort of connections, and there isn't really anything concrete. And there's a couple of, there's that meeting in India with Modi and the retinue and so on, but like nothing well formed. And he doesn't, as we can tell from the memoir, he doesn't take any interest in Hinduism at all.
No, he interestingly completely skirts it, which I find fascinating.
Right.
But yeah, so this is a work of apologetics in the sense that, like, if you've read Mere Christianity, which is probably the most famous work of apologetics, it's C.S. Lewis making a couple of like intellectual arguments about like why you should be a Christian, why you should believe that Jesus is the Christ. But like mainline Protestants, like C.S. Lewis, being intellectual was like you get like the point of a good church meeting was to get a very intellectually rigorous and productive sermon. Like the point of it all was to like engage in intellect. Like that was the kind of main avenue to get you into faith.
Right.
For Catholicism, especially for J.D. Vance's version, virtue is really important. And so you have to tell the story of your life. You have to tell the story of the people that you belong to, because virtue doesn't happen in the intellect. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's a lived thing. It's something that happens in autobiography. It's something that happens in the story of your community, because it's about how you belong to other people, how you build character and relationship to other people, how you go through struggle and work through reconciliation, all those kinds of things. The thing, and I say this, I'm just going to keep going if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
The thing that I really want people to understand about this, and I say this in the review, is that there's two things. I only allude to this in the review, but the testimony is like really the biggest evangelical sacrament. Like the testimony being like a narrative that you share publicly that has been dramatized to fit a kind of Christian arc of Eden, struggle, wandering, reconciliation. Like you can see this like this is a arc that explains all of history for Christians. This is an arc that you see kind of repeated in the ways that people will tell like an addiction story or tell about a coming to faith story, whatever.
Right.
And this is something that is like deeply ingrained in American culture because of the ways that this kind of narrative form has been secularized into American culture, which is so indebted to Protestantism. So it's interesting to me, one of the tells that JD is not like dyed-in-the-wool Catholic is that the way that he even does his apologetics is leading to Catholic conclusions, like a Catholic destination via a completely American Protestant pathway.
Right.
So this is something that like as a literary form to me tells on him quite deeply.
Right.
But the other thing is that I mostly think about country music. And so thinking through the lens of where country music has been in the last 20 years, we had like the era of bro country, which was really about sending people off in the Bush era to like go fight wars. And right now we're experiencing this nativist era of like, come home, build attachments, share some vulnerability. Like this, like music and culture don't have to be this thing that gets you amped up for war and doesn't like deaden your empathy. It's something that like connects you to people, but it does it in a way that makes you feel like you're the true inheritor of the American homeland. Like it's the Yellowstone of it all, where like the Duttons are the ones who really belong to America. And so in this world where like to be an American man in this era is to be someone who has social attachments, who has an interesting story, a story that's like more compelling than other stories on the American continent, then like autobiography takes on more than just like, this is the story of virtue. This is also the story of a politician who is trying to say that like he has found his way to like the heart of the American home. Like he belongs here most and belongs here more than others.
It's a huge journey that he takes there, and the story of the memoir is exactly that. Mm-hmm. And I think we both, in our understandings of his Catholicism, we understand the political instrumentality. We understand that it's vibes-based. I saw it as part of this kind of political roadmap for a kind of reunification of maybe a fragmented MAGA Christian coalition at this point. Mm-hmm. You call 100%. It blogboy theology because you're saying that the loyalty it expresses is to kind of a men's club rather than to the church itself. But blog boys don't really go to church, do they?
Some of them do, some of them don't. I mean, but like when he talks about Rob Dreher, some of the people he mentions are like blog boy Catholics. They come out of a kind of like outrageous fear. They come out of a kind of like this thing that can have a critical distance of Joe Rogan and, and like Tucker Carlson. But at the end of the day, it still complements what they're doing politically. Like it still works in coalition with them.
Right.
It's almost like a different tendency within right-wing masculinity. I think the blog boy of it is that I honestly think like a lot of them don't go to church, a lot of them do, and what I've seen more is that it follows where men feel like they're getting most power, or they're getting like most, honestly, like when we say power for men, for like really shitty men, we're mostly talking about reassurance. We're talking about like where they feel like somebody sees them and will comfort them, and they can have their needs, they can have their expectations of like sitting on top of an American hierarchy met.
Right.
And so like, you know, where they set up the ladder, whether it's in the church or it's in politics or wherever, they may move the ladder around, but like they'll go wherever they get to climb up it.
Right.
And so like you see a lot of folks right now who were like atheists during the Bush era coming home to Christianity, but they do it in Catholicism because there's a more like masculinist rigor to joining a tradition, to joining something that has like straight ethnic connections to Europe, like to Rome. Or you'll also see the grosser one right now is the ways that folks have taken over the Eastern Orthodox Church. So they can be Russian or Greek, and it ends up being a kind of like supremacist ideology. Also because those traditions have real ties to imperial violence in the past and also contemporarily.
Right.
Like people in the Orthodox Church still feel like they're fighting Muslims, like especially like, you know, when ISIS was at like the peak of its activity, there was like actual violence between the Orthodox Church and what many were framing as like all of Islam. You have the history of the Crusades. I mean, like one of the things that's bubbling up in the right-wing blogosphere is like these crusader memes, like, yeah, Christ is king, and Christ is king meaning like we like get our AR-15s and we kind of reenact these like crusader histories, which by the way were so pathetic. That's the other thing that people miss who don't know the history is like they were so pathetic, but they were also so gross that they spilled over into the rest of the world. Like they spilled over into colonization. I'm probably rambling because this is firing like 100 things off in my brain right now. So if I miss something, please, please back me up.
Well, it's cool. No, it's everything is good. But I guess one of the things with regard to the anchoring that he suggests Catholicism gives him, there are aesthetic issues involved with that as well. Yes. And, you know, I know that you'll be very familiar with that aesthetic tour that he takes through the various churches of the States. You know, there's folk hymns, there's mega church music. But then what do you think the liturgical and aesthetic cohesiveness of Catholicism offers the blog boy theologian?
Well, there's so many answers to this, and they all complement one another. I mean, the first is that white culture in general, and I say this as a country musician who has observed I need to say this as just a little, if I can do some apologetics for country music really quick.
Please.
Everybody in the U.S. who thinks that they're not on the right decides they're too good for NASCAR, they're too good for flea markets, they're too good for religion, they're too good for country music. And what has been completely ceded to the right and been the seedbed for all these things, it's all these little like trash Dollar General spaces that like, whatever. You got to show up to it, and also they tell a real tale on America, but you got to be humble enough to know that America is not a prestige institution.
Right.
And that ties me into, you know, I've seen enough of these debates in country music of like, oh, well, we don't like trap beats in our country music, so we want this like nostalgic thing that feels like it's not a part of like quote unquote mainstream culture. Or you'll also see like, or you'll see people just completely push towards trap beats but won't listen to like actual trap music, because so much of white culture is about a kind of reactionary aversion to and rejection of blackness, like a fear of blackness and how you assimilate to it or you don't. Like, because black culture is such a foundational part of the U.S. Like it's in our food, it's in our music, it's in our religion, it's in our language, it's in our storytelling, it's in our movies. Like everywhere that there is culture, it is, if it hasn't completely come from black folks, they've been instrumental in the creation of our cultural institutions,
right,
and our traditions. So I think part of the cohesion, the aesthetic cohesion of the church is that it is, and once again, this is a profound misrepresentation, but it is an easier representation to get to. Like, it's an easier lie to tell because there aren't as many barriers. But the church is something that ties you to Rome. It's something that ties you to Europe. It's something that has like a kind of Western ethnic tie to it. Like the masses before Vatican II, which is fairly recent, like in the last 100 years, were spoken in Latin. Understanding that like very few people even spoke Latin. And you also see the rise of folks who only go to Latin Mass now, like these kind of trad bros, like they're fully coming back in the Catholic Church.
Right.
So the kind of aesthetic cohesion, I think on the one hand is a real rejection of blackness and a real desperate need to hold on to your whiteness. At the same time, and I think this is deeply related, I think when it's funny, like I talk about pride earlier, but it's like, I think when you've really been about it, pride and humility go deeply together. Like there's a difference between being arrogant and knowing the dignity the floor of dignity that you always have to maintain with someone else, because the world won't give it to you. So you have to be vigilant about it yourself. And I think that J.D. Vance and a lot of his peers and a lot of, frankly, the like very lost young men who are finding their ways into these traditions really cannot, and I mean this meanly for J.D., and I mean this kind of halfway compassionately for like guys in their 20s who are trying to figure stuff out. Like there's a lack of humility. Like there's a lack of understanding. Like America just ain't. If you want to be white in America, you really just have to accept that you're white trash. Like there is no prestige to it. There's no great place to occupy. America is about taking away everyone's roots, whether it's the ways that the ethnic cleansing of indigenous folks, the cultural erasure and trauma of chattel slavery and of the Middle Passage, the ways that whiteness has meant that folks aren't Polish or Irish or whatever anymore, even though they say they are. A lot of Irish people will be cops, which is the whitest thing you could do. But like, all of this is a kind of like, there has to be a humility that you have about your place in the pecking order here, because America, I mean, I travel the country for a living. America is not it's not like the 4 blocks in Manhattan that everybody loves, and it's not the 4 blocks in Boston that everybody loves. It's strip malls, and it's Buc-ee's, and it's gas stations, and it's suburbs, and it's cul-de-sacs, and that is the country that we have as a reflection of the kinds of like white culture, white quote unquote culture that we have. And so part of the aesthetic cohesion to me is also this really desperate attempt to try to gussy up the ultimate trashiness of our whiteness. Like it's this very desperate way to be like, no, we are prestige whites. Like we have real things to be proud of and things that we've contributed to the world, when it's just not true. And there's a kind of humility you've got to have about like, I just ain't it. I'm not too good for anybody, including myself.
We want a history. We have a history. We need to have a history. Mm-hmm. I mean, the irony of gravitating towards Catholicism is that it's an incredibly diverse church at this point, right? It's like you'd have to find, a parish that really wore its whiteness on its sleeve in order to have all of those, gifts work for you. And I think that's going to be hard. But as you say, there is this rise, we'll get to it in a bit, but there's this rise of, tradcath culture that is tied in with a kind of romanticized, where do we come from? We have to reinvent our history.
And you see it, and just so folks know, like I'm not just picking on Catholics, you see it in every Christian movement right now. Like you see stories of the saints and liturgy being introduced into evangelical churches. You see a kind of like Catholic movement within Methodism. You see the Anglican split off of Episcopalianism, of the Episcopal Church, which by the way was completely just about queer folks and women. That's the only reason for it. But there's this kind of second generation of guys who like are in it now because they like how steady and measured the Anglican Church is, but they don't. But like for some reason they trust the Anglican Church, but not the Episcopal Church, and it's clearly just like the conditioning of like just affinity. It's just like who you know, and it's who you've come to trust because you've been conditioned by, you've learned to trust other men and to think that other men have more kind of authority on spiritual issues than queer folks and women, and that the appearance of the appearance of like tradition and the appearance of authority is the same thing as actually possessing authority and tradition.
A little bit of hillbilly karma, down home dharma gives you a good talking to. But till then, bless your heart, are what you are. I hope this life of meanness don't come easy, and a hard heart's hard on you. Well, I hope your dog don't ever love you, don't ever want to come home, and takes up at the neighbors, barks at your window all night long. I hope your AC's high.
So in part 2, we get deeper into the psychological and theological architecture of what Vance is up to and what it costs him and everybody else for him to do it. We talk about communion as a work of apologetics. That's intellectual work that starts from a predetermined conclusion and then reverse engineers all of its justifications. Vance reaches Catholic conclusions or aesthetics or vibes, Nathan says, through a Protestant testimony arc. And, you know, he's predicting that Vance won't be Catholic in 15 years. He'll have moved on to whatever gives him the next rung on the ladder of hoarding. That accumulation logic is the through line that we keep returning to. Nathan reads Vance as someone who's emptied out his soul in successive stages, given up his working class roots, his feminist debts to his grandma and to Usha, his wife, his solidarity with people who are like him in pursuit of whiteness and its thin prestige. So that's up now on Anti-Fascist Dad Patreon. So I'll see you over there, or you can catch it here in a few weeks because, as you know, everything gets let loose to the wild. Until then, take care of each other.